Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Sober podcast. I'm your host, Pop Buchanan, and today we have a very important episode. Our guest today is Faith Dickens. Faith is the CEO of Live Again Counseling Services, and we're very excited because Faith is going to give us some practical insights on how to deal with grief, relationships, and how to just to deal with loss in general. How are you doing today, Faith?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well. Let me just say thank you for having me. I feel so honored to be a part of this.
Oh man, the honor is ours. I reached out to people in the grief space and counselors, and you was the first one to graciously reply back to me. And this is one of the most important things I needed to talk about, especially for the sober is dope community. So
Right.
thank you. Faith, before we start, can you introduce yourself to our audience? Let them know about your origin story, what got you into counseling, and what brings you here today.
So my name's Faith Dickens. I am the CEO, like he said, of Live Again Counseling Services, and I can be reached at www.liveagaincs.com, right? Oftentimes I offer a number of workshops, but there's been a lot going on, so I haven't been doing that lately. I'm going to get back to that probably the end of next month. But a little bit about me is that in 2001, I was engaged to be married, and about 4 days before I got married, uh, I found my fiance dead. And so I went from planning a wedding to helping his family um, pick out a coffin and all of that kind of stuff, right? 25 years old. It was, I don't even know how to explain that. Like, it was crazy. So I dealt with that, and I really didn't grieve properly. It took me a really long time to get past it, to start back living again, and hence the counseling Live Again. So let's fast forward to 2014. 2014, I lost my mother and my father 7 months and 8 days apart. And so in this, my dad died February 14th of 2014. My mom died September 22nd, 7 months later. My parents had been married for 47 years. This was a little bit different from when my fiance passed. I think it was more difficult in terms of the pain. The pain was great with all of them, but it was different because I dealt with a lot of outside stuff in terms of dealing with the grief. There was stuff going on in my family. My character was severely being attacked and assassinated. Um, and so I went through a whole lot. And so that was in 2014. 2015, I'm moving on to just going to some business stuff. And I hired this coach, and we're having this call, and she's going over stuff with me. And I kind of subtly mentioned that my parents had passed the year before. And she's like, I want to go back to that. You mentioned your parents. And I'm like, yeah, I'm good. I'm like, what's up? Like, and she goes, did you go to grief counseling? And I'm like, no, I'm fine. She's like, no, 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 no. And I'm on the phone like, lady, I hired you to speak to me about business. She's like, sweetie, you can't go past your healing.
Mm. All right.
Okay.
Okay.
So I was just like, but I took her advice, and later, that maybe like a month or so later, I started grief counseling. And it was in grief counseling that I discovered that I had a passion to help people that was dealing with the pain of grief. And at that point, it's funny because you're in New York. And so at that point, the grief counselor was like, Faith, if you want, you can why don't you start testing it out? You can start, helping out and volunteering here, which I did. She said, but Columbia University has this program called Complicated Grief. And you can go there and take workshops and so forth. And so in the summer of 2015, my daughter and I flew to Columbia, right? I had no idea it was some lap dab in the middle of Harlem. Like, I'm green, like I'm a South Florida girl. It's very different from New York, right?
Absolutely.
We have green grass. It's just, we have our neighborhoods, but it's different. It's a different
It
landscape,
is. It is.
right?
Right.
So when we got dropped off in our Uber, like, I know there are different parts of Harlem because they're doing a whole lot, but I was just like, really? Okay. Nobody it was like culture shock. And
Yeah.
I've been in New York several times, but I had never had to stay like in Harlem or
Yeah.
anything.
Yeah.
So at any rate, we went and I did that. I came back. I did some certifications, and I'm even working on some additional education as we speak concerning that. But um, what happened was I'm also a licensed minister, and so what I found was, and my parents were pastors. What I found was it was very difficult because everything was, well, your parents are with the Lord and this and that. So from my perspective, it was like they kept over spiritualizing. It wasn't the point where my parents were. I was comfortable with that. I knew that, but I'm in pain. How do I handle the absence of the two people in my life that supported me more than anybody? The two people in my life that showed up, bumped my siblings, bumped aunts and uncles and everybody else and friends and, spouses. Mama and daddy was ride or die, right?
Right.
So how do I handle now? How do I handle their absence? And this is forever while I'm here. Like they're not coming back. So for me, it was a challenge to process this. And so I went on my own quest because I'm like, I can't be the only one. It was not just being in church. I mean, people are dealing with this, and I know people go to counseling and whatnot. And what we tend to do, especially in our community, we go for that one session and we think we perfect.
Right.
Like we don't want to continue. And so that's basically how I got started. And the difference was when my fiance died, I think I did one counseling session with like my pastor at the time, and he wasn't a grief counselor. And that's another thing. People get it all mixed up. Like everybody can't do that. And so with my parents, it was a totally different outcome. A book came out of it after I processed it properly. There's so many relationships. I'm here today because I processed it properly, and I began to find more of who Faith was ministerially because everybody's not coming to the four walls of the church. So I'm meeting people from all walks of life. They don't have to be a Christian. They don't have to have the same belief systems as me, but as I do. But pain is pain.
Right.
And two things humans share, that everybody wants to be loved and everybody has experienced some type of pain.
Right. Right. That's right. That's right. And you know what? First and foremost, may I send my condolences to your mom and dad and fiance. And God, I know how it is. I lost my father when I was 13 years old, 12 or 13. And it was just one of that's the whole catalyst. That's the whole point of my life. Like from that point, that was my identity. This kid who lost his dad, and I was jammed up with it because I was young and he was my hero. And I just didn't, I didn't experience death before that. It was no one that died. I mean, they kept everything insulated. If my grandparents died after, when my grandmother passed away, she was in another country. So I never really had no firsthand experience with death. And then my dad passes away and I'm praying every day. So I definitely know it's hard when it's a parent,
Right.
and it's equally in its own unique way hard when it's a lover, someone that you're in love with. And so I know you had to go through a lot, so my condolences go out to you there. So you go to Columbia, you take these courses, you go on your own steps, and now you decide that you want to settle in grief counseling. And so how has that experience been for you, and how's that journey? How long have you been doing it?
So I started, so when I came back in 2015 and I started kind of toying with it in 2016, but 2017, I officially launched Live Again Counseling Services.
Okay.
And so I've been doing it ever since. And we know that grief is not just the loss of a loved one, right?
Right.
It can definitely be grieving the loss of a career. It could be grieving the loss of, your health. You know what I mean? Somebody
Right.
could be on dialysis, found out that they have cancer. It could be grieving your empty nest. Your kids are all grown up. What am I going to do in this house? It can be grieving a pet. It can be, there's so many things that we grieve. What we grieve, what is important to us, what we love, what has not just a special place in our heart, but just takes up a space in us, period. And so there are so many different, the death of a relationship. Oh my God.
Right.
Because at
Right.
least, with my fiance, it was hard. But then you have people that are walking around divorced and they have a spouse that is not dead, that has all of this information about them, They were intimate, not just physically, but emotionally, mentally, spiritually. You know what I mean? So
Right.
there's so many avenues and so many ways that one can actually grieve. And so I think that the journey has actually helped me, and so coupled with it, you can't talk about grief without talking about healing. And
That's
so
right.
in so many instances, people want to move on to the next step without being healed. We do it in relationships. You see people, they break up, they move right on. It's like, no, dude, sit down. You need to get yourself together. But we
Right.
don't, because we cannot stand the silence of us. And so now that goes back as a counselor. Let's start taking the layers off. Let's go back to childhood. Let's go back to adolescence. Where did this come from where you cannot be alone? Because you got to learn how to be alone. Like
Yes.
at some point, and so there are just different avenues, but that's kind of what happened. And so I counsel people in the area of grief. I deal a lot with inner healing, soul issues, and things that people are trying to get past. I would say 85% of the clients that I meet with, typically when in our first session, it comes up about something from childhood. I mean, hands down. Like that whole childhood raising kids is something serious. Like people out here having babies and stuff like that. Listen, you responsible for a whole lot as a parent.
That's
And
right.
so speaking of, I was just telling you, my daughter went to Puerto Rico. She's an
Right.
adult.
Right.
But and it's
Congratulations.
funny because speaking of that, I had to kind of like let go. Like she is an adult, Faith. It's
Yeah.
gonna be all right. So, but parents, there's so much that comes. There's so much responsibility and accountability because we're raising this human, and they become an adult one day. And so a lot of times I have to go back and deal with that little girl that never got healed, that young man that never got healed.
Yeah, and look, that's beautiful because we could sit there for a bit because one thing I learned in my exploration through recovery is that the childhood trauma is usually what is fueling the addiction in the adult, right? And we know that the first 7 years of a child is where they get the most of their programs, their subconscious programming, and that kind of dictates that they call it the default programming. So that's what they dictate. If they're in an environment where the parent is an alcoholic and abusive, you usually see this a lot in men where the father's an alcoholic, he's abusive to the mother, then the son grows up and he drinks and he's abusive to his wife. And then he says, "Oh, it was from my dad." And a lot of people say that's not a valid excuse, but he doesn't realize that that's part of his subconscious programming. So he has to unlearn what he subconsciously process. So
Right.
that's deep because and also with adult children of alcoholics. So that's another thing that we call ACOA is in a recovery community. So part of the Sober is Dope podcast is we're healing from our addictions and our
Right.
negative coping mechanisms. And a lot of this has to do with our childhood trauma and some form of loss, right? So that's why it's perfect. And I want to use myself as a case study. I remember when my worst point of my addiction was when I went through a nasty break. Well, it wasn't a nasty breakup. It was a breakup that I didn't see coming because my alcohol stupor made me feel high and mighty. I had this little God complex. I thought I was the man. And then the girl dumped me and I just literally lost it, right? And I just it was destructive. I just kept drinking. I kept drinking. I wasn't eating and I couldn't think about anything. My friends was the guys used to laugh and be like, "Come on, man, there's no way this girl can have you this bent out of shape."
Bigger than that, yeah.
It was bigger than that, and I didn't know why. And even to this day, I probably did. I would think I was more disappointed in myself that my life fell to such a low point where this person had to leave, right? And then I had to. Then from that point, I continued to drink for 2 or 3 years. Met the girl, my boo that I'm with now, who I love, and I was with her throughout a lot of that journey. And we used each other to help each other heal, but it wasn't until I hit a point of maturity in myself where I had to sit down and say, it's not about the person I'm with. It's about me and my drinking and how I'm you dealing with this loss.
Yeah.
So, in your experience as a grief counselor, do you notice any correlation between people using alcohol and drugs to numb the pain with as far as grief and loss is concerned?
I've not had many cases of that, but I have had other forms of addiction,
Okay.
shopping, eating, sex, things of that sort, which is, I mean, addiction is addiction. It just depends on what your vice is.
Absolutely.
And so, a lot of times, and people, once we start the session and they begin to unpack and we begin to start, they're able to identify, because really all you're really doing is kind of coaching somebody to answer what they already know and that they don't
Okay.
on their own. And sometimes you may need to put a context clue out, but yeah, addiction is a huge part of people in terms of dealing with unresolved grief, right? I mentioned earlier about complicated grief. It was a trip because um, I had never heard of complicated grief. I didn't even know what that was
Right.
until I went to Columbia, and I sat there and I'm like, wow, like we did a number of case studies, watched some film, did some group studies and all of this stuff. And that's when you've reached a point where it goes beyond grief. And
Okay.
now it's like extended, like you are in a stupor. And that's a whole nother level. And so, but when it comes, going back to your original question about the addictions, absolutely. I think that the addictions could be success,
Okay. Right. Right.
right?
Right.
Because what happens is you start to overachieve. You're going to compensate now for what you didn't have. So when people look at, it's not just drugs and alcohol, there's so many other ways that you can become addicted to something and not even know it until it's like, hold on. It's like, why you always got to win? Now, don't get me wrong. We all want to win, right?
Right.
But if winning is the only thing you care about, you got to go back now and peel back. It's something going. So my friends, whenever we're together, because I'm
Right.
always like at some point in counselor mode, I'm like, you know what? And they're like, oh, well, here she go again. But it's so easy because that's my work, and
Right.
I'm able, because I've been in painful situations on so many instances. When you've gone through, and there are people that have probably gone through more pain than I have, but for what my personal experiences have been, if it's nothing else that I can identify pain.
Right. Right.
I don't care how you try to disguise it, Louboutins, you know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
A lace front, you know what I mean? The Maserati,
That's right.
the
Right.
penthouse. I see you,
Correct. Correct.
And on the flip side, somebody that's total opposite of all of that, I see you. So it's like, I think again, going back to love and pain, like I mentioned earlier, every human being, I don't care race, creed, color, nationality, ethnicity, we all want to be loved. And we all want to, at some point in our life, we're going to want to get out of some type of pain. And so when you can identify with where people are, then you begin to empathize with where they are, and you can kind of start to hold them accountable with where they need to be. Some people I've learned in counseling, everybody ain't on the fast track. Somebody just want to come and just talk. I'm about getting results. So I had to even learn that as a counselor. Like, you want to help because I want to help get you to this place. Some people just they enjoy being in that spot.
Okay. That's
And
deep.
me,
Yeah.
I'm like, you want to really pay me this kind of money hourly to sit up? Okay. And people were like, Faith, you gotta let them. And for me, I'm sitting here going, no, you're wasting your money. Faith, if that's what they want, you can't force people. Like, I can't make a client want it. They made the first step. I remember a few years ago, I was having this young man, he had a sex addiction.
Okay.
And his issue was he wanted to be faithful to his girlfriend, but he just couldn't help himself. Like, he was like, and he was in entertainment. Like, if
Oh
I
man.
call some of the people he was connected to. And so that was like my first like person that from that type of environment. And so we would have these conversations. And of course, it went back to his childhood with his
Yeah.
mom and his dad and what he saw. But I would be like, giving him the tips. And one day he said, um, can we slow down? This is too much. I said, am I going to? He said, yeah. Can we continue? I mean, we had been in the session for like 20 minutes. He was like,
Okay.
bruh, I can't do no more.
All right.
He wasn't, but it was a choice. Unfortunately, him and the young lady ended up breaking up. He just couldn't stop. And she finally came to a point where she was over it.
Okay.
And so, but yeah, he had a major issue with um, wanting to be with women, entertaining, because he was in the entertainment field. And so he had a major issue with all of that kind of stuff, and just trying to not even fit in, but like just, hey, you know, I mean, they giving it up. Faith, what am I supposed to do? I'm like, but you can't do that. You said you love her.
Right,
I know
correct.
I do. I really do. I'm like, but that ain't love, bro.
Right, right. And that's the nature of addiction. Is like, I love the person I'm with, but I couldn't stop drinking. And that was the only thing they wanted, right? They was like, well, you're a good person, but I can't
I
deal with
can't deal with you. Yeah.
and I'm like, I get it, I know, but I'm still thinking, how am I gonna break up? It was also this new relationship I had developed with the alcohol and the
Right.
drug, which was my drug of choice, and that's how. And we always say addiction is insidious. In his case, the sex addiction was insidious.
Yeah.
My case, the alcohol for the drug addict shopping. We call all non-substance abuse related addiction, process addiction, or behavior addictions like the sex, the gambling, and stuff. So they one and the same, and we address them all. And man, it's hard. So I think that's why I think therapy is important. I think talking to people like you and dealing with the counseling is important. I want to shift a bit to mental health. So we did a series on the Sober Though podcast where we discussed mental health, and one of the things that kept coming up when we was talking about depression, and I think this might play on the complicated grief thing, I'm not sure, but it was how the brain responds to any form of loss. And we was talking about neuroplasticity, how the brain changes, right? It could be anything. The brain could change in a positive way or in a negative way. But when people experience loss, it usually affects their brain, and then that creates some form of mental health component, whether it's through the depression, anxiety, some form of mania or something like that. And when I went through these breakups or when I lost my dad, I think I was suffering from major depression. But because of my personality, I wouldn't really show the symptoms. I was because they call me Pop for a reason. I'm much older now, so I'm way more chill. But when I was younger, I was always on 1,000. That's why they call me Pop. And but people will always say Pop's the happy guy. And it's usually those types: the person that's always smiling, the person that's always throwing a party, the happy person that's dealing with this pain. And I just thought that was fascinating. So any mental health, grief, and loss, can you shed some light on that?
Yeah. So grief and depression are two different things, right? And you said something when you talked about the complicated grief. So what happens is grief can mirror depression.
There we go.
Now, with you, it probably had become depression because you were so young when your dad passed. And based on what I'm hearing, it doesn't sound like you probably went through grief counseling.
No, no.
Okay, so what happened was you never had an outlet, and it was still there. You know, they did what they could to take care of you. People probably stepped in and try to compensate in terms of the loss of your dad. People tried to do as much as they could, probably, I'm assuming, right?
Right, right.
But that was their void. Nobody talked about it, whether it was talked about or not talked about. Nobody sat down with you to find out where you were. Right. And so now you go from this 13-year-old kid that's experienced a loss, and maybe your mom or the people around you were just as lost as you were. Because I know when my fiance died, I have a daughter, I couldn't help my daughter. Like I was a basket case. Right. And so it wasn't until later that I realized that, oh my God, like a couple of years later, like, oh my God, like I'm not helping her. And right. So I started reaching out to do what I could to help. But in terms of the depression, it can get to a place where if you're not grieving in a healthy manner, and if you don't mind, can I get to some of the mechanisms that's going to help you to process it?
Yes.
Okay, so the first thing is you need a counselor, right? Now, if your pastor happened to be a grief counselor, great. If you have insurance on your job and they send you to grief counseling, great. Sometimes if you have a loved one that has passed away and they were on hospice, sometimes hospice programs offer free counseling to immediate immediate relatives. And so you can get it there. Sometimes there are community agencies. Otherwise, you may have to pay for it. And let me say here, I want to park a bit. Okay. Because we spend money on everything. We're gonna make sure our specs are in tight. We're gonna have the makeup. We're gonna make sure our nails are done, ladies. We got Bond 9 cologne and perfume. We're doing all of that, right? We taking vacations to Dubai, but nobody wants to ever stop and really deal with that thing, like you say, that show up. and I look like I'm back because I used to do comedy. So, Faith is, and then I'm told, you're so strong. And the thing about being strong, no one ever checks to see if you're okay.
That's right. That's right.
The strong person is always overlooked. So I had to take care of me. Even now, there are things that go on sometimes with my family. And I'd be like, look, I got a mental break. I'm quick to do a staycation because I got to maintain and manage my mental health. Like, I'm not about to be out here in these streets and I'm putting on and whatnot, and I'm not taking care of myself. So you got to spend money that I really don't want to spend. It's worth me maintaining my mental health. So the first thing is get a counselor. You may need to look around. A lot of times I know I offer consultations. Do a free consultation. Fill them out to see if if you vibe with them, because you may not, there's so many different personality types, right? The second thing is self-care. I mentioned a moment ago. Do things for you. Now, I don't mean indulge to the point where you just start to, it becomes an addiction. I'm talking about where it may be go to the spa. It may be take that vacation that you just really didn't want to spend the money on. Now, you got the money, but you don't want to spend it on it, right? If you don't really have the money, do something where you do a staycation. Go to a hotel, Airbnb, something, you and some friends, or you by yourself to do something. Here's something real simple. Oh my God, maybe like 2 years ago, and people probably have been doing this. I'm late in the game. Candles. Listen, candles will bless your whole life. My favorite is eucalyptus. Man, let me tell you something. It's something about that aroma that helps to relax you, that puts you in, it brings you all the way down. Turn the lights down in the house, and I ain't talking about setting the mood, but I'm talking about just to relax. Because sometimes the TV is too much. People are like, did you see this show? I'm like, nope. I can't take nothing else that's hard on the emotions. Can't be watching all that. You have to deplug. And so get you a TJ Maxx, Marshalls, different places like that have a candle section. Go spend $10, $20, $30, get you a couple candles. That's going to help you. That's going to help you to calm down, start to know when to not answer this, right? Put it on do not disturb or turn it completely off, whichever one helps you the most. You got to start setting boundaries. If you know somebody gonna agitate you, if you know a particular venue, sometimes it could be, listen, when you grieving, especially when you're talking about the loss of a loved one, you can smell a scent that reminds you of that person, and it can send you in a whole spiral. So, and don't fight it. When it comes, let it happen. It's a roller coaster.
That's right.
I was so embarrassed. I was in a meeting last year. I was in this meeting, and I'm in this meeting with all of these men for this particular business thing that I was involved in. And something came up about elderly insurance or elderly health. And I started talking about my parents. Now, here I am. That was 2019. Yeah. This happened in 2014. I've gone to grief counseling. I'm a grief counselor. I broke down. Wow. And dudes are different. Right. So everybody feeling all weird, and it was so awkward because, of course, it's messing with them because some of them had situations because they told me the next day, right. Like, man, you almost had me. But the point is that it ripped. I wasn't expecting that, and I was like, I'm so sorry. They're like, Faith is okay. Yeah. I wasn't expecting that. Like, who does that? When I walked out, I was like, Faith, what were you thinking? But I'm human.
You're human. That's it.
That was my parents. I'm talking about in a major meeting. We were having a conversation about that elderly stuff. And my parents weren't even old. Like, my parents wasn't even 70 yet. And I broke down. So don't fight with when it comes. It may be uncomfortable. It may be at an inconvenient time, but you need to let it flow, especially when it's fresh. The relationship breakup, the career change. There's been so many. If I told you all my story, we'll be here all night. Ain't being here. We were talking about grief tonight, but there's been so many aspects of grief, right, that I'm not going to get into for the purpose of time. Breathe. Now, I'm fortunate enough to live in South Florida. Okay. Literally, I am 5 minutes from the beach, like literally.
Oh, wow. Awesome.
Like, people vacation where I live.
Right.
Right.
Nice.
So, what I've recently started doing is going to the beach.
Nice.
Now, for you in other states, find something therapeutic. It may be Central Park if you're in New York. I don't know. You
Right.
know, if you're in California, it may be the beach. I don't know. But find, it may be mountain climbing. Find something that brings you back to nature. Sometimes, prior to COVID, I would sometimes do sessions where I would intentionally schedule the session at the beach. And I
Mm,
would take my client at different points of me counseling them, depending upon what I knew we were going to be discussing. I would set the appointment at the beach and they come and they park and we meet up. And one of the things I always do, my purpose is, well, first of all, the beach is beautiful, but my main reason for doing it is I always tell them to look out in the ocean and they'll look out. And I'm like, what do you see? I see the water. What else do you see? I see the sky. I see birds. I'm like, well, does it look, because in Florida, I mean, the beach is so beautiful. I said, does it kind of look like the sky got pulled down and there's a backdrop behind the water? They're like, yeah. And I'm like, did we do that? And she's
wow.
looking at me like, what? I'm like, who did that? And they're like, God. God.
Wow.
And I'm like, yeah. I said, so if he did that and it's still here and there are hurricanes here, all kind of weather stuff has happened here and it's still intact, if he can take care of that, what you think about the girl? Girl, what you think about the stuff you got going on?
Wow. Wow. Powerful.
So now that doesn't mean that it's gonna happen tomorrow, but you get where I'm going with this?
100%. 100%.
So now that's in a counseling session. I'm able to go. Sometimes I go by myself because there's so much going on, especially in 2020. It's just been a year.
Right.
I gotta go and just walk, look at the water, put my feet in, see people doing stuff, whatever. The other thing you can do, I said, allow yourself to be emotional, breathe, take deep breaths, journal.
Mm,
Yeah, I'm
nice.
gonna go back because you did exhale. So yeah, breathe. Practice breathing, inhaling, exhaling, especially when you get up in the morning. When you get up in the water in the morning, making sure you drink lots of water.
Okay.
Keep yourself hydrated, not necessarily with caffeinated drinks. And I know people got Starbucks addictions and all that good stuff, but make sure you're staying well hydrated. Make sure you're taking care of yourself. If you already had pre-existing conditions prior to your grief, it can get very agitated because of the grief, because stress brings on other problems with your body. So be very careful not to overindulge. You know what I mean? You're going to have an ice cream cone or cookie. Fine, do it. But just be mindful. If you know you're already diabetic, be careful with having the sugar cravings. Just use wisdom, because you don't want
Right.
to end up going through grief and now you're dealing with a health problem, right? You get something
Right.
inflicted because of that. And so, yeah, journal. I actually didn't even think about it during the time. And at one point I was journaling a lot. I was able to use a lot of that for my first book that I wrote called Live Again. And so the journaling is important. It's because it's very cathartic and it helps you to go back and to be able to reflect on where you were. So day 10 of your grief and day 110 look very different in terms of your journaling, or they can look very much alike.
Mm,
But in between page 10 and 110, there may be peaks and valleys. And you're like, oh my God. Because when you come out of something, for example, when I had my daughter, they were saying, oh my God, childbirth is hard. And I had what they call back labor, which is supposed to be extremely intense.
okay.
So they were like, you're not going to remember. And I'm like, oh, I'll remember. No, you're not. I promise you. I don't remember the pain. I just know it was bad. I don't
Wow.
remember. I just knew
Okay.
that I only have one child.
Yes.
One. That's how great the pain was. We were,
Wow.
I wasn't married either, so we weren't trying to continue that kind of wedlock. But
Yeah.
the point I'm making is you're not going to remember the intensity of it and what you experience, because you may not come out being a grief counselor like I did.
Right.
But there may be things that you discover in terms of your purpose as you're journaling. And that journal one day could be worth you can end up monetizing on this pain.
Right.
So
Okay.
if you go the right route, what intended to come and you thought was going to take you out could be the very thing that will be used in your life to catapult you. You're here today because who would have known that this kid at 13 years old loses his dad, and so many children have lost their dad, but not everybody is doing a podcast. Not everybody is like us and wanting to get in where we fit into, like, man, I want to help in this situation. You know what I'm saying? And so
Absolutely.
they could become passionate about something else. It could be styling hair. Like, oh my God, I always loved hair, but I just can't stand to see people wig twisted. So I really want to get into that, you know what I'm saying, that field. You know, I don't like to see guys when they're not groomed properly. So whatever it is, that thing can become awakened, because let me tell you, pain and grief has a way like none other of bringing out your purpose and highlighting more of it if you're already in it. You start to see it from different angles and different perspectives, and you begin to see things at a different light. And watch this: what used to matter the most, your priorities are reprogrammed. Everything is done over. You're like, I don't even care about that. You don't care because it's not that you don't care about it. It doesn't hold the same weight that it used to.
Excellent.
So you journal, you write, take a mental health day, you know, do something for you, do something with the kids, the spouse, maybe do something alone. But whatever you do, at the end of the day, you got to take care of you. Let's see. A movement. He started Sober is Dope.
Right.
I started Live Again and a number of other things that I'm doing to help people, because I have a passion, almost a burden. Sometimes it's overwhelming to really help people. The thing is, I had to monetize it because we wouldn't be able to do Zoom if we didn't have resources to have this electricity on in this house.
That's right. That's right. That's
You know what I'm saying? I got to eat. I need soap and water. I got to wash my hair and all that good stuff.
Right.
So while you're pursuing purpose, there are ways to monetize books, speaking engagements, conferences, and everything ain't about the money, but money follows passion and purpose.
Absolutely. 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 Look at that. Ladies and gentlemen, look at all of that value there. I love that. And you know, one thing you touched on was certain, like what happened to you in that meeting, something they said about the insurance triggered you, right? So in recovery, we have to understand and watch our triggers. And when dealing with grief, you have to pay attention to what your triggers are and don't be afraid to let it happen. And so process those emotions, right? Unprocessed emotions is one of the most detrimental things to us in our mental health. When we, it's this new idea called the body keeps the score. When you don't process emotions, they get stuck in the body and you get all jammed up, right? And so it's important to process the emotions. I wanted to ask you a question. What do you recommend a person do when someone close to them experience a loss? Like, what do we say? That's always the most uncomfortable thing. Well, what do you say to a person without sounding like a total like idiot? You want to be helpful, you want to be compassionate, but you don't want to be like generic at the same time.
You know what? And I'm glad you asked that, because one of the things that when I'm dealing with people that are grieving, two things I tell them to do. One, be mindful because you're very vulnerable. So be mindful of people that are coming into your space with the wrong motives.
Okay.
Now, once you know your people have your best interests, you've already weeded out the other stuff.
Okay.
The other individual that wants to help the person that's grieving, a lot of times it's just being there.
Okay. All right. Just being there.
We overthink it, especially if you've not experienced it. So you get weird and awkward and you say stuff that end up agitating the person that's in grief.
Right.
And I've seen this and I've experienced it. And the person really genuinely is trying to help, but they have knee-jerk reactions as to what to do. The most important thing you can do is to show up and be there. If it's listen. If it's, can you take me to the store? Take them to the store. If it's, oh my God, I'm so hungry, I don't feel like cooking, take them something to eat. And I'm not talking about right around the time when the person died, whatever the loss. It may be months later. If it's, I have this coming up, ordinarily my mama would have been here. Ordinarily my husband, I'm talking about the people that they could have lost, right? Would have been here. go with them, right? Show up.
Show
Like
up.
this texting thing, when somebody died, like my mom died, and some people were texting me, but they don't know no better because I ain't trying to be funny. I'm not a millennial, right?
Okay,
But
right.
I don't call myself, I'm definitely not a baby boomer, but I
Okay.
call myself Bridger.
Okay.
I'm a
I
Bridger
think
because I
I'm
can
there
be real.
too.
Yeah. So I have old people wisdom. I have old soul.
Yeah.
And so it's like, nobody has taught them. Like, baby, you don't text people when they lose their mother. That's not proper etiquette, right?
Okay.
But nobody's teaching us this. So pick up the phone, call. Now with COVID, you can Zoom, you can FaceTime. Let texting be your absolute last resort. But if you're right there, it may be to listen. It may be to tell them it's gonna be okay eventually. You just have to kind of like have discernment because you're not gonna always know, but nothing out trumps just being present and showing up.
Wow. Okay. That's
It's
real.
not, it ain't that deep. Like people make it harder than what it is. I tried to be there for her, but you didn't show up.
Yeah.
Because sometimes, and let me say this, sometimes to the person that's trying to help relieve the grief, they're so uncomfortable that they start to push back. You can't do that. Now, if the person pushes you away and wants their space, you respect that. And then depending upon the relationship, when you see a person about to nosedive and you see them really going to a low place, depending upon the relationship, you may have to step in and rescue.
Okay.
We getting you out this house. Oh, I'm gonna sit here with you. Oh, you in your room with the shades? I'm getting in your bed too. I don't want you
Okay.
in my bed. Well, we gonna get in the bed together. Look, you want me to put the shades up or down? Because I ain't going nowhere. You know what I mean?
Okay.
And
Yeah.
I think these are things that aren't taught, right?
Right.
These are things that are in books. People don't. We talk about a lot of the conventional, like really book put together stuff, but it's real
Right.
practical.
It's practical. It's practical. In some cases, what if it's a trigger for someone and they want to be there for the person, but the death that the other person experiencing could be a trigger for them and it just shuts them down. What do they do in that situation?
And you explain that,
Okay.
right?
Okay.
Recently, a very good friend of mine lost his grandmother. His grandmother's in the Bahamas. He's Bahamian. So he was going back and forth whether or not he was going to do it. Well, his mom died, I don't know, maybe like 10, 15 years ago. So immediately when it happened, I knew what was happening. So he's like, oh, I don't know if I'm going to the funeral. I'm not sure because, and he's like, well, you got to take the COVID test and this. And I'm like, we make happen what we want to happen.
Yes,
The
right.
real deal was it was too much for him.
Okay.
He could
Okay.
not handle. He wanted to be there for his aunts and his family, but the reminder to go back
Correct.
to now bury my mother's mother, it takes me too low. And
Yeah.
I don't counsel my friends, but I knew what was happening.
Okay.
So you can be honest and say, you know what? I am so sorry I was MIA. Oh, I'm gonna be MIA for the next couple of days because this is hard for me because I'm still dealing with mama's death. I'm still dealing when John died. Whatever it
Okay.
is, be
Okay.
honest about it.
Be
I
honest
think the
about it.
biggest Pop, I think we just really have a hard time just telling the truth. Like it's not that hard. I think that when you're open and honest, because people deal with so much pride. Oh my God, we ain't gonna be dealing with pride and narcissism. That's
Yeah.
a whole nother podcast.
I know.
But because that's really what it is. It's
It
like,
is. Yeah.
bruh, don't none of us have it all together. Trust me, my mama used to say, keep living. As long as you're living, there's gonna be some things in life that we experience that is gonna knock the wind out of us. That's just how it
Right.
is.
That's right.
But the good thing about it is that we don't stay down,
We don't stay
right?
down.
So when you get up, what did you get up with?
That's right.
And
That's right.
so you're wanting to be there, be there. It's gonna be too much for you, communicate that.
Right. That's real. That's beautiful.
Now listen, I'm gonna let you know I'm willing to come, but I may be crying worse than you when we get started.
Yeah, correct. Correct. Be
And that
real.
may be what they need. You just never know. When my dad died, the funeral home brought some of the flowers to my parents' home, right?
Right.
They left some at the cemetery, but they brought like all these funerals, and I was hot. So for like a week, it was like a cemetery because my dad was well known.
Yeah.
So one day I was outside in my parents' yard and I was walking around, talking to someone on the phone, pacing back and forth down the sidewalk. So the sanitation worker, garbage man came and he got out, and I'm walking and I'm talking, and he was like, "Excuse me," and I'm like, "Hold on, yes," and he was like, "Did Mr. Eddie die?" And I was like, "Yeah, we buried him last week," and he just broke down.
Oh man. Wow.
Right? And I told the person, "No, I gotta go. I got a situation." Okay. So he starts to tell me how, my dad had been there for him, and there were times my dad did favors for him. It was so funny because, like, one time I needed to borrow some money, you let me borrow it, but I paid him back. I just kind of laughed.
Yeah.
He said, but when he got on dialysis, he had the port and he can't do a lot of lifting. And I always told him, don't worry about the garbage, because you got to take the garbage from the house to the road so they can pick it up
Right.
or whatever.
Correct.
And so he was like, and I had to sit in, literally, I guess that was the beginning of my grief counseling. I
Right.
had to counsel and help console. And it was
Yeah.
only like a week after we
Yeah.
had buried my dad. And another guy came. My parents were in ministry and they had a church or whatever. And a gentleman came by the house. He hadn't seen them. He's like, he used to call him mom and pop. I ain't seen mom and pop in a while. How they doing? What's up? And I'm like, they both died. And here we go.
Wow. Wow.
So I was the immediate relative, but I've had to be in positions where I've had to help people in the moment because they didn't know. And I didn't break down, but I could have, you know what I'm saying?
Right.
So,
Right.
but at that moment, it would have been all right. So I'm saying, for that individual that's saying it's too much for me, it makes me feel weird, it takes me, listen, you keep internalizing that stuff. That's what's wrong with you now. You never dealt with it. So now
Okay.
somebody else dealing with it, you can't even halfway start to begin to help them as a friend, as a spouse, as a co-worker, as whatever you are, a family member. I think that selflessness is everything.
Amen. Amen. I get that. That's right. That's right. Wow. Faith, that's a lot. And you gave us a lot today. And thank you because, with the state of the country right now with COVID, in the last 6 months, I mean, I must have lost at least 100 friends through, secondary friends, third friends. You hear it. My
It's
friend,
a lot.
it's the 6 degrees of separation. So with Facebook, you see someone that's close to you, they cousin. You may not know them, but it's right there.
Starting to
And you're seeing all of this stuff happening, and then you have to make peace with it. What I'm starting to realize now, and this is really important, because I worry a lot about the people I love, my mother and people in my family.
worry in terms of them not being here, or just
No, worry like the elders in my family being experiencing death so much, you start worrying about people like I don't like what I don't want nothing to happen to this one, and my uncle's getting older, and you start realizing that the next generation is that this
fading,
that point.
moving on.
Yeah, as I get older, I'm growing into my manhood. I'm 41 years old. I'm not, and I'm looking at my elders, and I just remember it was all like yesterday. We all was young yesterday.
Looking like they have more time behind them in front of them in front
Yeah,
of them.
and it's kind of like, and I'm starting to realize that my faith and understanding God and knowing that my dad died so many years ago, I still see him in my dreams. I'm starting to try to really have a healthy perspective when it comes to death, that I have to understand it's part of life, right? And that we all gonna have to go down that road, and it doesn't have to be such a dark and sad thing all the time. And I know that's hard, but I'm starting to say, well, everything, even I'm conscious now. I see a fly pass me, and I know the life cycle of a fly is like a couple of days, but the fly doesn't know that. And it's just, we take these things for granted. It's a
Yeah.
circle of life. And I'm just trying to put it into a healthy perspective so I don't get so bent out of shit. I mean, I would get bent like someone passes, like, oh, the world's over. And it's just this darkness. And I'm like, one thing I could say is when my dad died on his funeral, he had a gigantic smile on his face. And he was a
Wow.
tough guy. He was tough.
Wow.
Like it was no sucker in him. He was just like you don't make men like that no more.
Right.
Like your dad, you know what I mean? They don't make
Cut
those
from
men
that
anymore.
cloth. Yeah, cut from
Yeah,
that cloth.
yeah. And the one thing his parting gift to us was like, yo, you couldn't be sad at his wake. You couldn't, it's no way. His smile was crazy. It was like he had this big, perfect smile. He looked
Wow.
perfect. And it was just like, we was like, he got the last laugh. Like, it was funny because he was
Yeah.
like, And that way I always remember that what he saw in passing was something so beautiful. The one message he could send to us, the confirmation, was that one smile, the one thing he could have worked out. And that's just a testimony to anyone out there that's struggling, and I remember that, and that helps me.
Let me say this. It's funny that you say that because when my mother passed, she was on hospice and she passed away at home. When my mother passed, as God is my witness, you would have thought somebody put a ring light underneath her pillow. That's how bright her face was.
Wow,
She was
wow,
glowing.
wow, amazing.
And we sit here like, OMG. So it's something about when people die in a peaceful state that's
Yes,
totally
yes,
different. But I want to address when you talked about your elders. So
yes,
in that instance,
yes.
because I can relate, I've lost my parents, and my parents weren't necessarily old.
Okay,
My grandparent, all of my grandparents are deceased. I
okay,
have aunts and uncles on my mom and my dad's side, but I have one elder, one of my great aunts. She's like 95 now, and visit, make up get-togethers just to include them
okay.
outside of Christmas and Thanksgiving and what y'all, I know now it's a little bit different because the older people have, a lot of them have sometimes pre-existing conditions,
Right.
and so we're trying to be really careful with COVID. But I would say pop make the best of it, because at the end of the day, you have to start thinking. Now I'm fortunate enough to walk close enough. And when I make the statement, some people still gonna pick it up and think I'm being arrogant or thinking I'm whatever, but it's my experience, so I'm gonna
Yeah.
put it out there.
All right.
I'm fortunate enough to have a close enough relationship with the Lord where He began to tell me when my parents were going to pass.
Wow.
He
Wow.
literally spoke to me 2 years before my dad passed away, and I bawled. I was
Wow.
in prayer one day, and he's like, "I'm taking your dad." And I thought it was gonna be like tomorrow, and it was like, "No,
Yeah.
He's preparing your heart." So when it
Wow.
happened, of course I hurt, and it was difficult or whatever, but it was different because He prepared me. With my mom, 2 weeks after we buried my father, I had a dream about my mother.
Okay.
And me and these ladies that I did not know, we had the same exact cars for my dad's funeral in this dream. And we were getting ready to get in this car. And when we got ready to get in the car, the only person that got in the car was my mom. The door closed and I woke up and I'm thinking, OMG.
Wow.
And then I had a dream about 2 months, another dream about 2 months right before she died. So God deals, and everybody don't get that, but
Yes.
I was fortunate enough but that helped me to prepare. So a lot of the decisions I made them based on what I knew was about to happen. So family got mad. Certain things I couldn't reveal because it's like, oh, who she thinks she, I knew what I knew. I told one of my siblings, I'm like, listen, this is getting ready to happen. Mama getting ready to go. You think so? I'm like, I know so. I can't tell you when, but I had this dream. They kind of broke down, but they came back afterwards like, man, God
Mm,
showed you. So
mm,
I'm fortunate enough that He will show us, but sometimes people lose people. My fiance was unexpected. Now,
right.
even then, my relationship I wasn't as close to God as I am now, but I had a series of dreams about death.
Yes.
And He just kept preparing me. So what I'm saying is cherish it. And I
Right.
think that's what everybody's saying now. Cherish those people that you love. Treat
Mm,
them right. Do what's right because it's right.
right.
Don't do what's right because somebody watching you, somebody gonna report back. Do it like your life depended on it. If you live like that, you don't have no regrets when they leave.
Oh, amen. Amen. Faith, thank you so much. Before you go, can you tell us about Faith Works and your ministry, and how does that help you and everything? And do you want to briefly, can you talk to us about that?
Sure. So FaithWorks is my personal
I love the
Instagram.
name, by the way. Faith Works is
Yeah, that's my personal Instagram. But my other Instagram for business is Live Again CC.
okay.
Twitter is Live Again CC. Facebook is Live
Okay.
Again CC. I also
Okay.
have a personal Facebook of Faith Dickens. When you go to any of my pages, you're gonna pretty much see the same thing. I'm talking about healing, grief. Every now and then I might mention relationships in the terms of healthy relationships, not necessarily love interests, right?
Yeah,
But just
right.
how we interact in terms of our relationships. So
Yes.
you'll see a lot of that on my pages. You'll see some quotes about our prayer life. Like I said, I'm a minister as well. And so that work is very, very important to me. It's a work that I was thrust into, not because people lose family members every day. He chose me for this.
Yeah.
And I also do a lot of community stuff, and so that's something next that I'm venturing out with some other partners to start a nonprofit in dealing with our youth, starting to prepare them for understanding more about politics, more about who they are as African American, brown and black children.
Yeah.
That's something we're going to be doing. I'm also working on some things concerning just the overall community in terms of finance, mental health, just trying to get our people together for the part that God has called me to do. I always tell people
Wow.
I'm not called to everybody, but I'm definitely gonna reach the ones I'm called to.
Amen.
So you can reach me on those social media outlets. You can also reach me at www.liveagaincs.com and hit me up. I'm here. I love to help people, and that's generic. I love to help people get past pain so that they can get in purpose and live the life that they were intended to live.
Listen, wow, ladies and gentlemen, you heard it from Faith Dickens herself. This has been an amazing episode, one that really touched me deeply. And I just want to thank you, Faith. And if you're out there and you're struggling in any way, you can reach out to Faith. You can find her links. I'll link you guys. And just remember, go through the motions, process it, take care of your mental health. Don't be afraid to grieve. And, things that come together in time, and have faith. Thank you so much for joining us today. We'll love to have you on at any time. And so you're part of the Sober as Dope family. God bless you, and thanks again, Faith.